Rain pelted the cobblestone streets of Boston, turning the gaslit pathways into slick, shimmering ribbons. Nora Callahan ran through the darkness, her boots splashing through puddles, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, angry voices echoed off brick buildings. "There she is! That's the thief!" The mob's shouts spurred her forward, the weight of her small carpet bag pulling at her arm. 27 years of careful living, of doing everything right, reduced to this desperate flight through the night. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, plastering against her face as she darted down an alley. Ahead, the train station glowed like salvation. Steam billowed across the platform, obscuring the departing Western line. The conductor called final boarding as Nora burst onto the platform, heart hammering against her ribs. "Wait!" she cried, summoning the last of her strength to reach the slowly moving train. A railroad worker spotted her, his eyes widening at her disheveled appearance. For one terrible moment, she feared he would block her path. Instead, he extended his hand. "Jump, lady! Now or never!" Nora grasped his calloused palm and leapt, nearly losing her footing on the wet steps. He pulled her aboard just as shouts erupted from the station entrance. Through the steam and rain, she glimpsed the angry faces of her pursuers, bank clerks and police officers, before the train picked up speed and carried her away into the night. Inside the passenger car, Nora collapsed onto an empty bench, clutching her bag to her chest. Her hands trembled as she withdrew a yellowed telegram from her pocket. The paper had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases threatened to tear. "Miss Callahan, stop. We'll meet Montana Territorial Line. Stop. Silver Creek awaits. Stop." Thomas Clayton, a flash of memory overcame her. The moment she discovered the ledgers at Prescott Banking and Trust, the careful column of numbers that didn't align, how the wealthy customers' accounts mysteriously grew, while the immigrant miners and factory workers saw their savings dwindle. When she'd confronted Mr. Prescott and his son Frederick Jr. with evidence of their embezzlement, their faces had hardened with contempt. "Who would believe a woman with no family and no connections?" Frederick Jr. had sneered. "Especially when we have proof that you've been stealing from the bank for months." The forged evidence had been meticulous. Her signature on withdrawal slips she'd never signed. Small amounts taken from dozens of accounts. The perfect crime to frame someone else for. Nora unfolded a newspaper clipping from her coat pocket. Her own face stared back at her beneath the damning headline. "Female bank clerk absconds with customers' savings." Her throat tightened. Truth and honor had been the foundations of her life since childhood. Her father, a minister before his death, had instilled in her an unshakable moral compass. "The truth is sacred, Nora," he would say. "Without it, we have nothing." Now here she was, a fugitive running from lies while forced to live a lie herself. "You're running from something, aren't you, dear?" Nora startled at the voice. An elderly woman had settled into the seat across from her, keen eyes studying her face. The woman's silver hair was neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, her traveling dress well-worn but clean. Nora began, then stopped. The habit of honesty warred with her need for secrecy. "It's all right," the woman said gently. "We all have our reasons for heading west." She extended a wrinkled hand. "Martha Winters, going to Denver to live with my son." Nora hesitated, then took the offered hand. "Nora Callahan, going to Silver Creek to marry a man I've never met." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was now her truth. Thomas Clayton, a widower who had placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride, had been her last hope for escape. Their letters over the past months had been cordial, if not romantic. He seemed kind, honest, a mining engineer who had established himself in the Montana Territory. "A mail-order bride! How adventurous," Martha said, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "I hope he's handsome." "I hope he's kind," Nora replied, managing a small smile. That would be enough. As the train clattered westward through the night, Nora gazed out the rain-streaked window. Boston, the only home she'd ever known, disappeared behind her. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. Perhaps in Silver Creek, Montana, a place so distant it seemed almost mythical, she could start again. "Dear Lord," she whispered, too softly for Martha to hear, "forgive me for the untruths I must tell. Help me find my way back to the light." The countryside rolled past, dark and formless. Nora pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching raindrops race across the pane, and wondered what kind of woman would emerge on the other side of this journey. 6 days later, Nora stepped down from the stagecoach onto the muddy main street of Silver Creek, Montana Territory. After the train had deposited her in Helena, she'd spent another day in a crowded coach, jostled between miners, merchants, and a traveling salesman with an unfortunate cologne. The October air bit through her woolen coat, carrying the crisp scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. Silver Creek nestled in a valley, embraced by towering peaks still capped with early snow. Unlike the cramped, sooty streets of Boston, the sky here stretched endless and blue, making Nora feel both free and exposed. The town itself was smaller than she'd imagined. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, their false fronts declaring their purposes. General store, essay office, Silver Nugget Saloon. A wooden sidewalk raised above the mud connected the establishments. Men in worn clothing moved with purpose, nodding brief greetings to one another. A few women, their dresses practical rather than fashionable, carried baskets or guided children by the hand. "First time in Silver Creek, ma'am?" the stagecoach driver asked as he handed down her carpet bag. "Yes," Nora replied, trying to hide her apprehension. "I'm meeting Thomas Clayton. Do you know where I might find him?" The driver's weathered face fell. "Ah, miss, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Clayton was killed in a mine collapse 2 months back. Pocket of gas ignited. He and 3 others didn't make it out." The world seemed to tilt beneath Nora's feet. That can't be right. He sent for me. I have his telegram." Her fingers fumbled with the paper as if showing it might somehow resurrect the man. "I'm mighty sorry, miss," the driver said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "It was a terrible accident. The mining company claimed no fault, of course. They never do." Nora stood frozen, clutching her bag in one hand and the telegram in the other. The enormity of her situation crashed down upon her. She was alone in a strange town with no prospects and, she quickly calculated, exactly $12.37 to her name. "Is there a hotel?" she managed to ask, her voice steadier than she felt. "Silver Creek Hotel, just down the way," the driver pointed. "Albert Miller runs it. Tell him Joe sent you. He might cut you a deal." Nora thanked him, squared her shoulders, and began walking. Each step required conscious effort, as if her body had forgotten how to move forward without direction. The sidewalk creaked beneath her, drawing curious glances from passers-by. The Silver Creek Hotel was a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Inside, the smell of pine soap and tobacco greeted her. Albert Miller, a balding man with a bushy mustache that seemed to make up for his lack of hair, looked up from his ledger as she entered. "Good afternoon," she said. "Joe, the stagecoach driver, sent me." Miller's eyes assessed her travel-worn appearance and solitary state. "Room's 50 cents a night, extra for hot water and meals." Nora set her bag down carefully. "Actually, Mr. Miller, I was hoping to inquire about employment opportunities in Silver Creek." His eyebrows rose. "Employment for a lady like yourself?" "I'm educated," Nora said, straightening her spine. "I can read, write, and cipher. I've worked as a bookkeeper, managed household accounts, and served as a governess to children in Boston." "Boston, eh?" Miller tugged at his mustache. "Not many jobs for ladies with book learning here. The schoolhouse has Miss Patterson, been teaching here 5 years now." Nora's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. Desperation was a scent predators could smell. "There might be something, though," Miller added slowly. "Silas Harrington out at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Lost his wife about 6 months back. Has a boy, 9 or 10 years old, gone wild since his mama died. Heard tell he's looking for someone to teach the youngster and help keep the house accounts." Hope flickered to life. "Where might I find Mr. Harrington?" "Probably at the land office. Been arguing with the railroad men all week about water rights." Miller pointed through the window. "Down the street, building with the green door." As Nora turned to go, Miller added, "Mrs. Callahan, or is it Miss?" "Mrs.," Nora lied, the false title feeling like a small shield. "My husband passed recently." Miller nodded, not questioning the absence of mourning clothes. "Mrs. Callahan, I should warn you. Silas Harrington ain't an easy man. Grief's made him hard as Montana granite. Some folks say he was already that way before Rebecca died. Thank you for the warning, Nora replied quietly. But I've known hard men before. They've taught me nothing useful. Outside, as Nora made her way toward the land office, a commotion down a side street caught her attention. A group of women stood on a corner holding signs. Votes for women, declared the largest banner. A well-dressed woman with steel gray hair addressed a small crowd, her voice clear and commanding. The Montana Territory can lead the nation in recognizing that women deserve the same rights as men. We make our homes here, we build communities, we raise the next generation. Why should we not have a say in the laws that govern us? Nora paused, drawn to the woman's passionate speech. In Boston, she had attended several suffragist meetings, though her work schedule had prevented deeper involvement. Seeing the movement here in this frontier town gave her an unexpected sense of connection. A young woman with bright red hair noticed Nora and approached with a leaflet. Are you new to Silver Creek? We meet every Tuesday at the back room of Henderson's Bakery. Thank you, Nora said, taking the paper. I just arrived, but I'll keep it in mind. With a nod of solidarity, the redhead returned to the gathering. Nora tucked the leaflet into her pocket and continued toward the land office, her stride more purposeful. She wasn't the only woman in Silver Creek fighting for a place in the world. The land office door stood ajar, raised voices spilling into the street. Nora hesitated, then squared her shoulders and stepped inside. The territorial land office smelled of wood smoke, ink, and masculine frustration. 3 men stood around a surveyor's map spread across a scarred oak table, their voices rising in the cramped space. You can't just redirect Red Creek, Reed. The tallest man planted his fist on the table, making the inkwell jump. That water has fed Broken Arrow cattle for 15 years. The railroad needs access to that water for the new station, Mr. Harrington, replied a slender man in an Eastern suit. Progress doesn't stop for a few cows. 1,500 head isn't a few cows. It's the livelihood of 30 people who depend on Broken Arrow. Nora assessed the scene quickly. The man in the Eastern suit was obviously the railroad representative. Expensive clothes, soft hands, condescending smile. The third man, hunched over the map with pencil in hand, was clearly the surveyor, caught in the middle, nervous eyes darting between the opposing parties. And the tall man had to be Silas Harrington. Even with his back to the window, Nora could read the tension in his broad shoulders, the controlled power in his stance. When he turned slightly, lamplight caught the sharp planes of his face, all angles and shadows, as if carved from the mountains themselves. He appeared to be around 35, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from sun and wind rather than genetic fortune. A neatly trimmed beard, streaked with a touch of premature silver, framed a mouth set in a grim line. Mr. Reed, Harrington continued, his voice low and dangerous, your railroad doesn't need that water access. My cattle do. You route that spur line through the northern section, you cut off Red Creek, and 1,500 head will die before spring. Progress requires sacrifice, Mr. Harrington, Reed replied smoothly. The Northern Pacific brings civilization, commerce, connection to the East. Surely that's worth adjusting a few fence lines. Harrington's laugh held no humor. You call it civilization when you starve out the ranchers who've been here for years? When you cut off water that sustained herds since before white men drew the first survey line? Nora recognized that kind of anger. It wasn't hot rage, but cold fury. The kind that came from fighting battles you were tired of fighting, from standing your ground when the world kept trying to move it beneath your feet. Reed noticed her first. Madam, this is a private— Are you Silas Harrington? Nora interrupted, addressing the rancher directly. Harrington turned fully toward her, storm-gray eyes narrowing. He took in her travel-worn appearance in one sweeping glance, assessing and cataloging. I am, he replied, voice clipped. And you are? Nora Callahan. She stepped forward, refusing to be intimidated by his imposing presence. I'm told you might need a governess for your son. Something flickered in Harrington's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. The territorial clerk at his desk glanced up, clearly startled by her directness. Reed huffed. This is hardly the time for domestic inquiries. Actually, Harrington interrupted, still watching Nora, it's exactly the time. Gentlemen, I believe we're done here. You route that line through the northern section, and we'll be in court until your grandchildren are running the railroad. I've got lawyers who are a hell of a lot meaner than this conversation." He gathered his hat from a hook by the door. "Mrs. Callahan, walk with me." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. There was something in his tone, an assumption that she would follow, not because he ordered it, but because she had approached him with purpose. Outside, the October afternoon had that crystalline quality peculiar to mountain country, the air so clear it seemed to magnify distances. Harrington led her down the wooden sidewalk, his long strides forcing her to walk briskly to keep pace. "You came for Thomas Clayton," he said, not looking at her. Nora's stomach dropped. "You knew him?" "He was a friend." Harrington's tone remained neutral, but something in the set of his jaw suggested genuine grief. "Told me he was bringing a bride from Boston." Then the mind collapse happened. "I just learned of his death today," Nora said quietly. "I had no idea until I arrived." Harrington stopped abruptly, turning to study her face. His gray eyes were unsettlingly direct, as if trying to read truth or lies in her expression. "Thomas spoke highly of you," he said finally. "Said you were educated, capable, good with numbers." Nora blinked, startled by this information. "He spoke of me to you?" "He mentioned his Boston bride was smart as a whip and easy on the eyes." A muscle twitched in Harrington's jaw, though I suspect he was downplaying the first part and exaggerating the second to avoid my ribbing. A flash of indignation sparked through Nora's grief. "I assure you, Mr. Harrington, my education is quite thorough. I managed accounts for a prominent Boston bank and served as governess to the children of several respected families." Something that might have been amusement briefly softened his stern features. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise, Mrs. Callahan. I simply meant Thomas had a habit of humble bragging." Nora wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she redirected. "I understand you might need someone to teach your son and help with household management." Harrington studied her for another long moment before nodding. "Ethan's 9, smart as they come, but wild since his mother died. Won't listen to the ranch hands, won't do his lessons, spends half his time getting into trouble in town or out on the range where he could get himself killed." "Children often act out when grieving," Nora said gently. "They don't have the words for what they're feeling." "You sound like you've got experience with it." "Personal experience," Nora admitted. "I lost my parents in a fire when I was 16. Harrington was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he seemed to come to a decision. "The position includes room and board, $35 a month. You'd teach Ethan his lessons, reading, writing, arithmetic, history. Also help with general household management." He paused. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Liu, is excellent with cooking and cleaning, but she and Ethan don't quite speak the same language, literally or figuratively." $35 was generous, suspiciously so for frontier standards. Nora carefully kept her face neutral. "And what exactly would you expect beyond those duties, Mr. Harrington?" His expression instantly turned to ice. "I expect you to educate my son and help run a household, Mrs. Callahan. Nothing more." The cold fury she'd witnessed in the land office returned to his voice. "I'm a widower, not a villain." He paused, then added with brutal honesty, "I'm not looking to replace my wife. I'm looking for someone who can help my son become the man his mother would have wanted him to be." The rawness in that statement, the genuine grief underneath the hard exterior, caught Nora off guard. She'd been prepared for impropriety, not pain. "When would you need me to start?" "Now good enough. Ranch is an hour's ride north. We can have you settled before dark." Harrington glanced at her carpet bag. "That all you brought?" "It's all I have," she replied simply. Something in his expression shifted, a recognition, perhaps, of shared losses and starting over. "Then I guess that's all you need." As they walked toward the livery stable where his horse waited, Nora felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. She had secured a position, a roof over her head, a temporary escape from the law. But she was also putting herself entirely in the power of this stern, grieving man, a man whose cold eyes seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. Silver Creek fell behind them as they rode north, Nora seated awkwardly side saddle behind Harrington, one hand gripping the edge of the saddle, the other clutching her carpet bag. The mountains rose around them, indifferent to human concerns, eternal in their snow-capped majesty. "What happened to your wife?" Nora asked after long minutes of silence, the question escaping before she could reconsider its propriety. Harrington's back stiffened slightly. "Pneumonia," he answered, voice flat. "Took her in 3 days. Nothing the doctor could do." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "So am I," he replied, and they rode the rest of the way in silence. The Broken Arrow Ranch sprawled across a valley where the mountains seemed to cup the land like protective hands. Nora's first sight of it from horseback stole her breath. The ranch house was solid timber construction with a wide porch, corrals fanning out to one side, and a massive barn that spoke of prosperity. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth as the evening chill descended. Several smaller outbuildings clustered nearby, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, what appeared to be a blacksmith shop. What struck Nora most was the sense of permanence. This was a place built to last, to shelter generations. A boy erupted from the barn as they approached, all gangly limbs and wild brown hair. Ethan Harrington looked like his father would have at 9. Same storm gray eyes, same stubborn jaw, but there was a recklessness in his expression that made Nora's chest tighten. "P, Pa, you went to town without me again," he accused, stopping short when he noticed Nora. His eyes narrowed with instant suspicion. "Who's she?" "Watch your tone," Harrington said mildly, dismounting with fluid grace. He reached up to help Nora down, his hand steady at her waist. The touch was impersonal, but warm through her dress. "Ethan, this is Mrs. Callahan. She's going to be your governess." The boy's expression went from curious to mutinous in a heartbeat. "I don't need a governess. I need to learn ranching." "You need to learn reading and writing and how to conduct business," Harrington corrected. "You want to run this ranch someday? You'll need to know contracts and accounts and how to write a letter that doesn't make you sound like an illiterate fool." "Ma taught me to read," Ethan insisted, chin jutting forward. "Your mother's been gone for 6 months, son," Harrington said, voice gentler now. "And you haven't opened a book since." He turned to Nora. "Mrs. Callahan starts tomorrow morning. You'll treat her with respect." Ethan glared at Nora with the pure, unfiltered hatred only a child can muster, then spun on his heel and stalked back toward the barn. "That went well," Nora said dryly. Harrington had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "He's testing you. Does it to everyone." "Of course he is," she agreed. "His world turned upside down and he's trying to see if the new pieces will stay in place or fall apart too." She watched the boys retreating back. "I'll win him over. It just takes time." "What makes you so sure?" "Because I understand him," Nora said simply, "and because I don't give up. Now shall we discuss the practical arrangements?" Mrs. Liu Wei turned out to be a small Chinese woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of household management. She showed Nora to a comfortable room on the second floor, simply furnished but clean, with a window overlooking the ranch yard and mountains beyond. There was a pitcher and basin, a sturdy bed with a patchwork quilt, and a small desk beneath the window. "You teach boy," Mrs. Liu said in careful English, watching Nora unpack her meager belongings. "Make him behave." "I'll try my best," Nora promised. "Good. He wild since mother die. Break father heart every day." Mrs. Liu's expression softened. "Mr. Harrington, good man, sad man. Now you help, maybe make better." Nora started to clarify that she was there to teach Ethan, not heal Silas, but Mrs. Liu had already bustled away toward the kitchen. That first evening passed in careful politeness. Dinner was venison stew with vegetables from Mrs. Liu's garden, fresh bread, and strong coffee. Ethan refused to speak beyond monosyllables, pushing food around his plate. Harrington was preoccupied with ranch business, occasionally asking his son brief questions about the day's activities, receiving equally brief answers. Nora observed silently, taking mental notes about household dynamics. The tension between father and son was palpable. Not anger, but a mutual uncertainty, as if neither knew how to bridge the gap left by Rebecca Harrington's absence. After dinner, Harrington excused himself to check on the horses, and Ethan immediately tried to escape to his room. "Ethan," Nora called softly. The boy froze on the stairs, shoulders hunching defensively. Could you show me where your mother kept your lesson books? I'd like to see what you've been studying. Don't have them anymore, he muttered. Burn them. Nora kept her expression neutral. That must have felt satisfying in the moment, she observed. Probably hurt later, though. Ethan turned, suspicion bright in his eyes. What do you know about it? I know that when my parents died, I tore up every letter they'd ever written to me, Nora said, moving to the bottom of the stairs. Ripped them into tiny pieces and scattered them out a window. Took me years to stop regretting it. She met his hostile gaze steadily. Those letters were the only pieces of their voices I had left. Something flickered in the boy's expression, a crack in the armor of anger. I didn't burn all of them, he admitted reluctantly. Just the arithmetic book. I hated arithmetic. Well, arithmetic is fairly hateable, Nora agreed with a small smile, but it's also necessary. Tell you what, tomorrow we'll start with something more interesting. She tilted her head. What do you want to know about? The question seemed to catch him off guard. About what? Anything. History, science, literature. What interests Ethan Harrington? He stared at her for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if this was some kind of trick. I want to know about Indians, he said finally. The Blackfoot that used to live here. Pa says they respected the land better than white men do. Nora nodded. Then we'll start there. But I'll need your help since I'm new to Montana. Can you show me your father's books tomorrow? I'm sure he must have some about local history. Another long, assessing stare, then a single nod. Ethan turned and fled upstairs, footsteps fading down the hallway. Nora was still standing at the base of the stairs when Harrington returned, bringing the cold evening air with him. He paused in the doorway, clearly surprised to find her there. He actually talked to you, Harrington said, sounding stunned. We're not friends yet, Nora clarified, but we've established a truce. He wants to learn about the Blackfoot tribes tomorrow. Harrington's eyebrows rose. That's unexpected. He hung his coat on a peg by the door. I have some books in my office you can use. James Willoughby's Peoples of the Northern Territories is the most accurate. Thank you. Nora hesitated, then added, he needs to talk about his mother, Mr. Harrington, to remember her out loud. A shadow crossed Harrington's face. I know, he said quietly. I just can't. Every time I try, it all comes back. How fast the fever took her. How helpless I felt watching her slip away. The pain in his voice was raw and unguarded, at odds with his usually stoic demeanor. Then perhaps he can remember her with me, Nora suggested gently, and you can join when you're ready. Harrington looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, a crack in that carefully maintained armor. Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. Nora, she said impulsively, if I'm to live in your home, we might as well use given names. A brief pause. Silas. Her name and his rough voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. That night, lying in her new bed, listening to the wind howl across the Montana Valley, Nora stared at the ceiling and took inventory of her situation. She had secured safety, for now. She had a roof, food, and a purpose. She had met a grieving man and his wounded son, both needing something she might be able to provide. But she had also begun a life built on deception. Nora Callahan, respectable widow, was a fiction. The real Nora was a fugitive, living under false pretenses. Her true identity a danger to herself and potentially to this household. Outside her window, the mountains stood sentinel against the night sky, ancient and indifferent to human concerns. Nora turned onto her side, pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, and prayed for forgiveness for the lies she must tell to survive, and for the strength to somehow find her way back to the truth. In the darkness, sleep came slowly, punctuated by dreams of running, of pursuing footsteps, and of gray eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed facade. Dawn broke over the broken arrow in ribbons of pale gold and rose, painting the mountains in light before reaching the valley floor. Nora rose early, splashing cold water on her face from the basin and dressing quickly in her second-best dress, navy blue wool with a high collar, practical yet presentable. She pinned her dark hair in a simple knot and studied her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back seemed both familiar and strange, the same features but set in a new determination. This is who I am now, she whispered to herself. Mrs. Nora Callahan, governess. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Lou already at work in the kitchen, kneading dough with strong, efficient hands. The small woman nodded approvingly at Nora's early appearance. You help? She asked, gesturing to a pile of potatoes waiting to be peeled. Of course. Nora took up a knife and set to work. The two women worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic thump of dough and the scrape of the knife against potato skin. Boy sleep bad, Mrs. Lou said eventually. Have dreams. Call for mother. Nora nodded, unsurprised. Children often have nightmares when they're grieving. Father too, Mrs. Lou added, lowering her voice. Walk at night, sit in dark. Sometimes drink whiskey. Not much. Just sit and look at mountains. Before Nora could respond, heavy footsteps on the bay stairs announced Silas's arrival. He entered the kitchen wearing a flannel shirt, denim pants, and suspenders, his hair still damp from washing. He paused momentarily upon seeing Nora at the kitchen table, as if startled by her presence. Good morning, she said, continuing her work. Morning. He moved to the stove where a pot of coffee simmered. You're up early. I've always been an early riser, Nora replied, and I wanted to help Mrs. Lou before lessons began. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes as he poured himself coffee. Ethan usually comes down around 7. If he comes down at all. He'll come, Nora said with quiet confidence. Silas raised an eyebrow but didn't contradict her. He drank his coffee, standing by the window, looking out at his land as the sun gradually illuminated it. In the growing light, Nora could see the full extent of the ranch, meadows stretching toward distant trees, cattle grazing in the lower pastures, a silver ribbon of creek winding through the property. It was beautiful in a rugged, untamed way that Boston's manicured parks could never match. To her surprise, Ethan did appear at 7, hair uncombed but clothes relatively clean. He slouched into the kitchen, casting a suspicious glance at Nora before sliding into his chair at the table. Morning, son, Silas said, refilling his coffee. Morning, the boy muttered. Nora continued peeling potatoes, not making a fuss over his arrival, simply nodding in acknowledgement. Mrs. Lou placed a plate of biscuits and jam before him, along with a glass of milk. Eat good, she instructed. Learn good. After breakfast, Silas departed to work with the ranch hands, leaving Nora and Ethan sizing each other up across the kitchen table. Your father mentioned he has a book on the Blackfoot tribes in his office, Nora said, keeping her tone casual. Shall we see if we can find it? Ethan shrugged but rose to lead her to a small room off the main living area. Silas's office was surprisingly well appointed, a sturdy desk of polished oak, walls lined with bookshelves, a comfortable leather chair. Maps of the territory were pinned to one wall, and a gun cabinet stood locked in the corner. It was the room of an educated man, not just a rancher. Pa reads a lot, Ethan explained, seeing her surprise. Says a man's mind needs exercise, same as his body. He's right, Nora agreed, scanning the bookshelves. They were well organized. History, law, literature, science, with many volumes she recognized from Boston libraries. Your father has quite the collection. Ma used to read to me from these. Ethan touched a shelf of children's classics. Robinson Crusoe, The Swiss Family Robinson, Treasure Island. Which was your favorite? Treasure Island, he admitted. Ma did different voices for all the pirates. Nora found Willoughby's Peoples of the Northern Territories and pulled it from the shelf. Perhaps we could read that again sometime, she suggested. For now, shall we learn about the Blackfoot? The morning passed more easily than Nora had expected. They settled at the kitchen table with books, paper, and pencils. Ethan, despite his initial reluctance, proved curious and intelligent. He absorbed information quickly and asked thoughtful questions. The Blackfoot tribe's relationship with the land particularly interested him. They only took what they needed, he said, tracing a map of traditional territories. Pa says that's why the land stayed good for hundreds of years, until white people came and started taking everything. Your father sounds like a forward-thinking man, Nora observed. Ethan shrugged. He argues with the other ranchers sometimes. They want to fence everything, kill all the wolves, dam up the creeks. Pa says we're supposed to work with the land, not against it. By noon, they had covered not only the Blackfoot culture, but also incorporated geography, some basic mathematics related to hunting territories, and written exercises where Ethan recorded what he'd learned. Not once had she needed to scold him or force his attention. When Silas returned for the midday meal, he paused in the doorway, observing them unnoticed for a moment. Ethan was bent over his paper, carefully copying a Blackfoot symbol from the book, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. "How's it going?" Silas asked, making his presence known. Ethan looked up, a flash of self-consciousness crossing his face. "We're learning about the Blackfoot," he said, pushing his paper toward his father. "I drew their symbols." Silas examined the drawing, genuine interest in his expression. "Good work, son. That's their symbol for buffalo, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Callahan says tomorrow we can learn about how they tracked animals." Ethan's voice held an enthusiasm that had been absent the night before. Over the next 2 weeks, Nora established a routine. Mornings were for lessons, reading, writing, arithmetic woven into subjects that captured Ethan's interest. Afternoons were more practical, helping with accounts, corresponding with suppliers, occasionally riding out with Ethan to check fence lines under the watchful eye of the ranch hands. But despite the progress with lessons, Nora faced constant testing. Ethan would forget assignments, use crude language he'd picked up from the ranch hands, or try to shock her with tales of ranch dangers. Stampedes, rattlesnakes, wolves that had killed calves last winter. When these tactics failed to fluster her, he began skipping lessons altogether, hiding in the barn or sneaking off to the creek. The confrontation came on a rainy afternoon in late October. After searching the house, Nora grabbed a shawl and headed for the barn. The air was damp and chill, promising an early winter. Inside the barn, the sweet scent of hay mingled with the earthier smells of horses and leather. Rain drummed on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound. "Ethan?" she called, moving between the stalls. The horses nickered softly, but there was no response from the boy. A muffled sob from the hayloft caught her attention. Nora hesitated, then climbed the wooden ladder, her skirts hampering her movement. She emerged into the dim upper level to find Ethan curled in the hay, clutching something to his chest, tears streaming down his face. He jerked upright when he saw her, hastily wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "Go away!" Nora remained at the top of the ladder, giving him space. "I was worried when you missed our lesson." "I don't care about stupid lessons." His voice cracked with emotion. "Just leave me alone." "I can do that," she said quietly. "But sometimes being alone with grief just makes it heavier." Ethan stared at her, anger warring with anguish on his young face. "What do you know about it?" "I know that after my parents died, I would find places to hide and cry too," Nora said, carefully moving to sit on a bale of hay, maintaining distance between them. "There was a closet in the boarding house where I lived. I'd go there when the pain got too big to carry." The boy's shoulders slumped. He looked down at the object in his hands, a woman's handkerchief embroidered with the initials RH. "It was my ma's," he whispered. "It still smells like her, like lavender." "May I?" Nora held out her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan passed her the delicate fabric. She handled it with reverence, noting the fine stitchwork along the border, tiny flowers and vines in blue thread. She had talented hands. "She made all our clothes," Ethan said, watching her carefully. "And she could bake the best apple pie in the whole territory. Everyone said so at the county fair." "Tell me more about her," Nora encouraged, returning the handkerchief. Like a dam breaking, words poured from Ethan. Stories about his mother's singing voice, how she knew every bird call in the valley, her ability to calm the most skittish horse with just her presence, how she taught him to read by age 5, insisted on proper grammar even when the ranch hands teased her for it, how she made Christmas special even when snow isolated them for weeks. "Pa doesn't talk about her," Ethan said finally, exhausted by emotion. "It's like she's disappearing because nobody says her name anymore." Nora's heart ached for this child, caught in the terrible silence that so often follows death, when those left behind stop speaking of the departed, as if mentions might deepen the wound. "I have an idea," she said, reaching into her skirt pocket. She withdrew a small, leather-bound journal she'd purchased from the general store during their last trip to town. "This is for you." Ethan took it cautiously. "What for?" "For your memories of your mother," Nora explained. Write down everything you remember. Stories, things she said, what she looked like when she laughed. Draw pictures if you want. The most precious memories shouldn't just be kept in our hearts. They should be written down so they can never be lost. The boy ran his fingers over the blank pages. Can I write about anything? Anything at all. Happy memories, sad ones, days when you're angry she's gone, questions you wish you could ask her. Nora smiled gently. It's your book, Ethan. No one will read it unless you want them to. He clutched the journal to his chest over the handkerchief. Thank you, he whispered. That evening, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, writing furiously in his journal while Nora helped Mrs. Liu prepare dinner. Silas returned from working the north pasture, pausing in the doorway at the sight of his son so engaged in writing. He raised a questioning eyebrow at Nora, who simply shook her head slightly, indicating they would talk later. Throughout dinner, Ethan was more animated than usual, even asking his father a question about his mother's favorite horse. Silas froze momentarily, then answered softly, Starlight, the black mare with the white blaze. You were born the same night she foaled. Later, when Ethan had gone upstairs, Silas joined Nora on the front porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of pine. Stars emerged between scattered clouds, impossibly bright in the clear mountain atmosphere. He's writing about Rebecca, Silas said, his voice low. I saw her name in his journal. Yes, Nora acknowledged. He needs to remember her out loud or on paper. And the journal was your idea? I lost my parents suddenly too, Nora explained. I know how memories can start to fade around the edges if you don't preserve them somehow. Silas leaned against the porch railing, his face half in shadow. I should be doing that for him, talking about her, keeping her alive in stories. Self-recrimination roughened his voice. But every time I try, it feels like losing her all over again. Grief has no timetable, Nora said gently, and no rule book. You're doing the best you can. Am I? He turned to look at her fully, vulnerability evident in his usually guarded expression. Sometimes I think I'm failing him entirely. Rebecca would have known what to do, what to say. She always knew. You're not failing him, Nora insisted. You're here, you're trying. That counts for more than you know. Well, they stood in silence for a moment, the night air cooling around them, the distant howl of a wolf echoing across the valley. Thank you, Silas said finally, for the journal, for understanding him in ways I can't seem to. He's a remarkable boy, Nora replied. You and Rebecca did well. The ghost of a smile touched Silas's lips. She did well. I just tried to keep up. As the days passed, Ethan's resistance gradually thawed. The journal became a constant companion, and he began sharing selected entries with Nora. Sometimes they were simple memories, his mother's cookie recipe or the song she sang while hanging laundry. Sometimes they were questions. Did Nora think his mother could see him from heaven? Was she proud of him? These questions tore at Nora's heart, but she answered as honestly as she could, drawing on her own religious upbringing without imposing it on the boy. I believe those who love us are never truly gone, she told him, and I can't imagine any mother not being proud of a son like you. Silas observed these changes from a distance, his expression unreadable. But Nora sometimes caught him watching his son with something like wonder, as if seeing him clearly for the first time since Rebecca's death. One afternoon, while Ethan was helping the ranch hands mend a fence, Nora took the opportunity to organize Silas's business correspondence. His desk was cluttered with unopened mail, invoices, and cattle sale records. With methodical efficiency, she sorted, filed, and prepared responses where needed, her banking experience proving unexpectedly useful on a Montana ranch. Among the papers, she found several letters regarding water rights and land boundaries, ongoing correspondence with the railroad company that seemed to be growing more contentious. The most recent letter, bearing the Western Pacific Railroad letterhead, contained thinly veiled threats about reviewing the original survey markers and possible discrepancies in the land grant. Nora was still studying these documents when Silas returned unexpectedly, stopping short in the doorway of his office. What are you doing? His voice was sharp with suspicion. Nora looked up, startled but not guilty. Organizing your correspondence. You've missed reply deadlines on 3 cattle contracts, and the supplier in Helena has sent 3 invoices for the same order. Silas blinked, momentarily thrown off by her matter-of-fact response. He crossed to the desk, examining the neat piles she'd created. I also drafted responses, Nora continued, pushing several sheets toward him. You'll want to review them, of course. Silas picked up one of her drafted letters, scanning it with growing surprise. This is extremely thorough. I was a bookkeeper before I was a governess, Nora reminded him. Numbers and contracts are a language I speak fluently. His gaze fell on the railroad letter she'd been reading. A muscle tightened in his jaw. That wasn't meant for your eyes. I apologize for overstepping, Nora said, though she wasn't truly sorry. But if the railroad is challenging your land boundaries, that affects everyone at Broken Arrow, including Ethan and me. Silas studied her for a long moment, as if reassessing her. You understand what they're implying? That they've found or manufactured discrepancies in your original land grant that might reduce your property holdings. Nora tapped the paper, specifically mentioning the southern boundary along Red Creek, which you were arguing about in the land office when we met. Surprise flickered in his eyes. You picked up on all that from one meeting? I pay attention, Nora said simply, especially when someone's livelihood is at stake. Silas sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of frustration. They want the water access for the new rail station. Been trying to buy that section from me for months. Now they're looking for ways to take it without paying. Can they do that legally? They shouldn't be able to, my deed is clear. But the railroad has friends in territorial government, and money speaks louder than law out here sometimes. His eyes narrowed slightly. You seem to know a fair amount about property law. Nora's heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. I worked at a bank that handled property transactions. You pick things up. After a moment, Silas nodded, apparently accepting her explanation. Well, I could use someone with your knowledge looking over these papers, if you are willing. Of course, Nora agreed, relief washing through her. Later that night, long after the household had gone to sleep, Nora sat by her window, gazing out at the moonlit mountains. The day had been a victory of sorts. Ethan was warming to her, and Silas now valued her organizational skills. She was becoming necessary to this household, carving out a place for herself. Yet the guilt of her deception weighed heavier with each passing day. These people were beginning to trust her, share their lives with her. And every word from her lips was filtered through the veil of her false identity. Lord, she whispered to the silent room, how can I build a life on lies when you are truth itself? Show me a way forward that hurts no one. But no divine guidance came. Only the soft hooting of an owl outside her window and the distant howl of wolves hunting under the Montana moon. November arrived with a bitter cold snap that froze puddles solid and painted the windows with delicate frost patterns each morning. Nora had been at Broken Arrow for nearly 3 weeks, long enough to observe the subtle rhythms of ranch life. The pre-dawn rising, the constant work of maintaining animals and land, the way conversations around the dinner table followed the cycle of chores and seasons rather than social events or politics. She had also begun to notice oddities. Mrs. Lou, usually in bed by 9, sometimes moved through the darkened house well after midnight. Twice Nora had heard the kitchen door open in the small hours, followed by the soft creak of footsteps on the back porch steps. On the third such night, curiosity overcame propriety. Wrapping herself in a shawl, Nora slipped from her room and followed the sound of Mrs. Lou's departure. Through the kitchen window, she glimpsed the small woman's lantern, bobbing along the path toward the far pasture, where a line of cottonwood trees marked the property boundary. Nora hesitated, torn between returning to bed and satisfying her curiosity. The rational choice would be to mind her own business, to protect the precarious position she'd established. But something in Mrs. Lou's furtive movements spoke of secrets, and secrets had a way of becoming dangerous when left unexplored. Decision made, Nora pulled on her boots and coat over her nightdress and slipped outside. The night air bit through her layers immediately, her breath forming clouds in the moonlight. She followed at a distance, grateful for the nearly full moon that silvered the landscape and made the path visible without a lantern of her own. Mrs. Lou led her past the south pasture, across a narrow wooden bridge spanning Red Creek, and into a dense stand of pine trees that marked the edge of Broken Arrow. Beyond the trees, a steep hillside rose, dotted with scrub and boulder outcroppings. Nora hung back as Mrs. Liu approached what appeared to be a natural cave formation in the hillside. Only when the woman disappeared inside did Nora creep closer, moving as silently as possible over the needle-strewn ground. Voices drifted from the cave. Mrs. Liu's accented English mixed with responses in what Nora assumed was Cantonese. Carefully, she peered around the cave entrance. The space within was larger than it appeared from outside, illuminated by two lanterns hanging from rough-hewn support beams. Bedrolls lined the walls, and a small fire burned in a stone-ringed pit near the center, smoke rising through a crude chimney hole. 4 Chinese men occupied the space, 3 sitting near the fire, 1 lying on a bedroll, apparently injured or ill. Mrs. Liu knelt beside the prone man, opening a basket she'd carried from the ranch. She withdrew bandages, a jar of salve, and several parcels wrapped in cloth that appeared to contain food. "Fever better?" she asked, placing a hand on the man's forehead. "Some better," he replied in halting English. "Still pain." "Railroad boss not look for you here," Mrs. Liu assured him, as she unwrapped bandages on what appeared to be a severely injured leg. "You safe until heal." A twig snapped beneath Nora's boot. All heads turned toward the entrance where she stood partially exposed. One of the men leapt to his feet, brandishing a knife. "Wait," Mrs. Liu commanded, rising quickly. "She teacher from ranch, not railroad man." Nora stepped fully into the lantern light, hands raised to show she carried no weapon. "I'm sorry for intruding," she said. "I was concerned when I saw you leave the house so late." Mrs. Liu's expression was guarded, torn between suspicion and the practical need for another pair of hands. "You tell Mr. Harrington?" "No," Nora assured her, "and I won't if you don't wish it." The housekeeper studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Come, help hold bandage." Nora approached the injured man, kneeling beside Mrs. Liu. His leg was a mess, a deep gash from knee to ankle, inflamed and seeping despite previous treatment. His face was drawn with pain, skin hot with fever. "What happened to him?" Nora asked softly as she held the edges of the wound together while Mrs. Liu applied fresh salve. "Dynamite accident on railroad," one of the other men explained, his English better than his companions. "Boss say Zhang careless, no pay doctor. Say go back work or go back China." "This happens often?" Nora asked, helping wrap clean bandages around the leg. "All time," the man nodded grimly. "Chinese worker cheap. Die, more come. Railroad no care." As they worked, Nora learned that Mrs. Liu had been helping injured Chinese railroad workers for over a year, ever since construction began on the new spur line. The men paid next to nothing, forced to work in dangerous conditions, denied medical care when injured. Those who complained disappeared. "My husband worked railroad 10 years, Mrs. Liu explained, her usually stoic face softening with sorrow. "Die when bridge collapse. Boss say his fault. No money for widow." Nora's heart ached at the injustice. "Does Mr. Harrington know about this place?" Mrs. Liu shook her head. "Good man, but white man still. Maybe make trouble if no Chinese hide on land." "I don't think he would," Nora said, remembering Silas's comments about respecting the land and his fair treatment of his own ranch hands. "But I'll keep your secret if that's what you wish." Relief softened the older woman's features. "Thank you. These men need help. No one else give." By the time they finished changing bandages and distributing food, the eastern sky had begun to lighten. Nora and Mrs. Liu hurried back to the ranch house, slipping in through the kitchen door just as dawn broke. "You good woman," Mrs. Liu said as they removed their coats. "Good heart." "As are you," Nora replied, warming her chilled hands by the stove that Miss Liu was already stoking to life. "I'd like to help, if I may." And so began Nora's involvement in what she came to think of as the Underground Railroad of Silver Creek. Twice a week, she accompanied Mrs. Liu to the cave, bringing medicine purchased in town with her own small salary, food borrowed from the kitchen stores, and books to help pass the long hours of hiding. Zhang, the injured man, proved to be particularly interesting. As he recovered, Nora learned he had been not just a laborer, but a clerk for the railroad company, with some education and the ability to read and write in both Chinese and English. He had worked in the survey office before being demoted to manual labor after a dispute with a white supervisor. "I see maps," he explained one night as Nora changed his bandages. "Old maps, new maps, not same. Lines move." "What do you mean?" Nora asked, intrigued. Railroad make new map. Move creek line. Jiang made a gesture with his hands, indicating shifting boundaries. Take more land than paper say. Nora's pulse quickened. Are you saying they falsified survey maps? Zhang nodded vigorously. Boss say make creek bend more this way. He demonstrated with his finger. Make railroad land bigger, ranch land smaller. I say wrong. Boss say I work dynamite now. This information nagged at Nora's mind as she returned to her regular duties. It connected too neatly with the threatening letters from the railroad company about discrepancies in the Broken Arrow boundaries. If Zhang was right, the railroad wasn't just finding errors in the original surveys, they were creating them. One evening while Silas was in town and Ethan occupied with his journal, Nora slipped into Silas's office to look for bandages and iodine for Zhang. Mrs. Liu had mentioned a medicine cabinet kept there, and with Zhang's fever spiking again, they needed stronger remedies than their usual herbs. The cabinet yielded the supplies she needed, but as she turned to leave, a leather folder on Silas's desk caught her eye. It was labeled simply Rebecca, and lay open as if recently consulted. Nora knew she should walk away. This was private, personal, the grief of a man who had lost his wife. But something in the official-looking documents visible within compelled her closer. Heart pounding with guilt, she glanced at the open pages. They contained doctor's reports, a death certificate, and handwritten notes in Silas's precise script. One phrase leapt from the page. Symptoms inconsistent with pneumonia. Onset too rapid. Consider arsenic? Breath catching in her throat, Nora quickly scanned the other documents. Silas had been methodically documenting his wife's symptoms, comparing them with medical text, consulting with doctors in Helena, all pointing to one terrible conclusion. Rebecca Harrington might not have died from pneumonia at all, but from deliberate poisoning. In the margin of one page, Silas had written a single question. Who? The sound of boots on the porch sent Nora scrambling away from the desk, hastily shoving the medical supplies into her apron pocket. She was halfway to the door when Silas entered, stopping short at the sight of her in his office. Mrs. Callahan, he said, surprise evident in his voice. What are you doing here? Nora manufactured a calm she didn't feel. Looking for more writing paper for Ethan. His journal is nearly full. Silas's eyes flicked to his desk, to the open folder she'd been examining. His expression shuddered instantly. The paper is in the top drawer, he said, voice suddenly cold. I would appreciate you asking before entering my office in the future. Of course, Nora said, heat rising in her cheeks, partly from being caught, partly from the knowledge she now possessed. I apologize for the intrusion. Ethan, sensitive to the mood, ate quickly and escaped to help the ranch hands with morning chores. Left alone with Silas in the kitchen, Nora gathered her courage. Mr. Harrington, she began, about yesterday. It's forgotten, he interrupted, not meeting her eyes. All the same, I should explain. There's nothing to explain. His voice was flat, final. He rose from the table, reaching for his coat. I'll be checking the north pasture today. Won't be back until supper. Nora watched him stride away, frustration rising within her. The man was a fortress with walls a mile thick. How could she help him, help any of them, if he wouldn't let her in? Later that morning, a ranch hand delivered a telegram from town. The yellow paper trembled in Nora's hand as she read the brief message. Attention all merchants and residents, stop. F. Prescott Jr. of Boston arriving next week. Stop establishing new Western banking branch. Stop resolving outstanding legal matters. Stop, cold dread washed over her. Frederick Prescott Jr., the man who had framed her, the son of the bank owner who had embezzled from his own customers, was coming to Silver Creek. Her precarious sanctuary was about to crumble. Snow began falling that afternoon, fat white flakes that quickly blanketed the landscape in pristine silence. By evening, the world outside the windows was transformed. Harsh angles softened, bare branches decorated with crystalline mantles. Under different circumstances, Nora might have found it beautiful. Now she could only see it as a trap, closing around her. Frederick Prescott Jr. coming to Silver Creek could not be coincidence. Had he traced her here? Was he still pursuing the embezzlement charge to cover his own crimes? Or was he genuinely establishing a Western branch of his family's bank? With her presence in the same small town, a terrible stroke of bad luck? Whatever his purpose, Nora knew one thing with certainty. She could not be seen in town while he was there. One glimpse of her face would destroy everything she'd built. "You look troubled," Silas observed over dinner, his earlier coldness apparently forgotten. "Just concerned about the snow," Nora lied. "It came earlier than I expected." "First snow usually hits mid-November," Silas replied. "We're right on schedule. Don't worry, the house is well provisioned for winter." "Will we be snowed in?" Ethan asked, excitement coloring his voice. "Like last year when we couldn't get to town for 2 weeks?" "Probably not that bad yet," his father answered. "But you should bring in extra firewood tomorrow, just in case." Nora pushed her food around her plate, stomach too knotted with anxiety to eat. She had to make decisions quickly. Should she flee before Prescott arrived? But where would she go, with winter setting in and limited funds? Should she confess the truth to Silas? Hope for his protection? But would he believe her? A woman he barely knew, over a respectable banker from Boston? "Mrs. Callahan," Silas's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "You've barely touched your food." "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I'm not feeling well this evening." "You're not getting sick, are you?" Ethan asked, genuine concern in his young face. "Ma started with just feeling poorly at supper, too." The innocent observation sent a chill through Nora that had nothing to do with the weather outside. If Rebecca had been poisoned rather than falling ill naturally, "I'm sure it's nothing," she assured him quickly. "Perhaps just a headache from the change in weather." That night, Nora paced her small room, weighing options that all seemed equally disastrous. Stay and risk exposure. Flee and face the wilderness in winter. Confess and potentially lose the only safe haven she'd found. Outside her window, the snow continued falling, erasing paths, covering tracks, as if suggesting that the past could be buried if only the blanket were thick enough. A soft knock at her door startled her from these thoughts. She opened it to find Mrs. Liu, concern etched on her weathered face. "You not eat," the housekeeper said. "Bring tea." She extended a steaming cup that smelled of ginger and herbs. "Thank you," Nora said, genuinely touched. She accepted the cup, breathing in the fragrant steam. Mrs. Liu didn't leave. Instead, she studied Nora's face with shrewd eyes. "Trouble comes," she stated flatly. "I see in your face." Nora hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Yes, from my past." "Past follow everyone," Mrs. Liu said with the wisdom of her years. "Cannot outrun shadow." "This shadow could destroy everything I've built here," Nora admitted. Mrs. Liu considered this. "You good person. Help Chang, help boy, help ranch. Whatever shadow, not change this." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. "Thank you for saying that. But some shadows are very dark indeed." "You sleep," Mrs. Liu patted her arm. "Morning bring new thoughts." But sleep proved elusive, and morning brought only the news that Silas would be riding into town despite the snow. The railroad company had sent urgent papers regarding land boundaries that required his immediate attention. "I'd like you to come with me," he said to Nora's surprise. "Your eye for contracts might prove useful." Panic flared in her chest. "I should stay with Ethan," she demurred. "Continue his lessons." "Ethan can manage his studies alone for one day," Silas countered. "The railroad is attempting something underhanded with these new survey claims. I need someone who understands legal language." "Pa," Ethan interjected, "can I come too? Billy Henderson said they were getting new books at the general store." Silas considered, then nodded. "Bundle up warm. We'll leave in an hour." Trapped, Nora retreated to her room to compose herself. The thought of entering Silver Creek with Frederica Prescott potentially already there made her physically ill. Yet refusing to accompany Silas would raise questions she couldn't answer. An hour later, bundled in every warm layer she possessed, Nora climbed into the wagon beside Silas. Ethan squeezed between them for warmth. The snow had stopped, but a good 6 inches covered the ground, transforming the landscape into an alien world of white curves and shadows. The journey to town was slower than usual, the wagon wheels occasionally slipping on hidden ice beneath the snow. Silas handled the team with expert hands, his face set in concentration above his heavy scarf. "I've been meaning to ask," Nora said, desperate for distraction from her growing dread, "about the name of your ranch. Why Broken Arrow?" Silas glanced at her, seemed to debate whether to answer, then relented. "When I first came to this valley, I found a Blackfoot arrowhead by Red Creek, snapped in half. Seemed like an omen, something broken that could still be useful in the right hands." Pa was broken too, Ethan added matter-of-factly. That's what Ma always said. Silas's eyebrows rose in surprise. Your mother said that? She told me you came west because bad people hurt you back east, and you needed to heal, the boy explained, like a broken arrow needing to be reforged. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Surprise, vulnerability, a hint of pain quickly masked. Your mother had a poetic way of seeing things, he said finally. They lapsed into silence, but Nora's mind raced with this new information. What had broken Silas Harrington before he came to Montana? What wound had he been trying to heal by establishing this remote ranch? Silver Creek appeared ahead, smoke rising from chimneys into the clear blue sky, sunlight gleaming off snow-covered rooftops. Under normal circumstances, it might have seemed picturesque, a frontier Christmas card scene. Today, it loomed in Nora's vision like a fortress to be breached. As they approached the main street, a knot of people gathered outside the assay office caught Silas's attention. Something's happened, he murmured, directing the wagon toward the commotion. Albert Miller, the hotel owner, detached from the group when he spotted them. Silas, good timing. The railroad's filing formal boundary challenges with the land office. Not just against you, half a dozen ranches along Red Creek. On what grounds? Silas demanded, jumping down from the wagon. Survey discrepancies, they're claiming. Got some fancy lawyer from Helena backing them up. Miller's gaze shifted to Nora, still seated in the wagon. Mrs. Callahan, you might be interested too. There's a banker from Boston set up temporary office in Henderson's old place, looking to establish a branch here, bringing Eastern financial stability to the frontier, he says. The blood drained from Nora's face. How interesting, she managed. Seems an odd coincidence, Silas observed, helping her down from the wagon. Railroad challenges land rights just as a new bank arrives to offer loans against those same lands. Mighty convenient timing, Miller agreed. This banker, Prescott's his name, already offering special terms to ranchers worried about losing their claims. I'm sure he is, Silas said grimly. He turned to Ethan. Son, go on to the general store. I'll meet you there after I speak with Judge Whitaker. But no arguments, Ethan. This is men's business. Reluctantly, Ethan trudged toward the general store, kicking at snowdrifts along the way. Silas turned to Nora. Mrs. Callahan, would you accompany me to the land office? I'd value your perspective on these so-called discrepancies. Every instinct screamed at Nora to refuse, to hide, to run. But she knew that entering the land office was far safer than wandering Silver Creek alone, potentially crossing paths with Frederick Prescott. Of course, she agreed, falling into step beside him. The land office was crowded with angry ranchers, the territorial clerk trying vainly to maintain order. Silas shouldered his way through, Norvaro following in his wake, until they reached the main desk where a distinguished older man was examining papers. Judge Whitaker, Silas greeted him. What's happening here? Samuel Whitaker, silver-haired and sharp-eyed despite his years, looked up with a grim expression. Railroads filed challenges based on revised survey data. Boy claims the original territorial surveys were inaccurate, particularly along waterways. That's absurd, Silas retorted. My grant is clear as day. So are all of these, Whitaker gestured to the stack of documents before him. But the railroads brought in a new surveyor who claims the baseline was incorrectly established in the original 1807 survey. Baseline? Nora inquired, professional interest momentarily overriding her fear. Both men looked at her with mild surprise. The fixed reference point from which all survey measurements proceed, Whitaker explained. If it's wrong, every property line derived from it is also wrong. But surely that would affect the entire territory, not just properties along Red Creek, Nora observed. Precisely, Whitaker nodded, seeming impressed by her understanding. Which is why this claim stinks to high heaven. They're only challenging the boundaries that benefit them. Mrs. Callahan has experience with property transactions, Silas explained. She's been helping organize my affairs at the ranch. Is that so, Mom? Whitaker studied her with new interest. Perhaps you'd care to examine these supposed discrepancies, Mrs. Callahan. A fresh pair of eyes might spot something we're missing. Before she could respond, the land office door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and a well-dressed man whose face Nora knew all too well. Frederick Prescott, Jr. stood on the threshold, removing expensive leather gloves, his arrogant gaze sweeping the room. "Gentlemen," he announced in the cultured Boston accent that had once charmed Nora before she discovered the viper beneath the veneer. "I understand there's some distress regarding property boundaries. Perhaps Prescott Banking might offer assistance in these trying times?" Nora turned away quickly, heart hammering, using Silas's larger frame to shield herself from view. But it was too late. Prescott's eyes had already found her, widening in recognition before narrowing with calculated malice. "Well, well," he murmured, just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "What an unexpected pleasure. Nora Callahan, or should I say Nora Bennett, Boston's most wanted bank thief, hiding in plain sight in Silver Creek." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Nora. She stood frozen, the carefully constructed facade of her new life crumbling around her. Silas's expression darkened with confusion, then suspicion. "Mrs. Callahan? What is he talking about?" Prescott smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "Oh dear, has she been lying to you too? This woman is no widow. She's a fugitive from justice, wanted for embezzling thousands of dollars from my family's bank." He reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded newspaper. "I believe her likeness even made the national papers." He unfolded the page, revealing the same damning headline that had haunted Nora's nightmares. "Female bank clerk absconds with customer savings." Her own face stared back from the page, confronting her past and present in one terrible moment. "There must be some mistake," Silas began, but uncertainty colored his tone. "No mistake," Prescott insisted smoothly. "I'd know that face anywhere. She worked for Prescott Banking and Trust for 3 years before her theft was discovered. Quite the clever scheme, small amounts from dozens of accounts, mostly immigrants who wouldn't notice right away." "That's not true," Nora finally found her voice, anger burning through fear. "You know that's not true, Frederick." Whispers erupted around the room. Judge Whitaker raised a hand for silence. "Mrs. Callahan, or whoever you may be, these are serious allegations," he said gravely. "They're false allegations," Nora replied, straightening her spine, "designed to cover the Prescott's own crimes." "How dare you?" Prescott stepped forward, outrage contorting his handsome features. "My father built that bank on integrity and trust." "Your father built that bank on stealing from those who couldn't fight back," Nora retorted, months of suppressed rage finally finding voice. "I discovered the discrepancies. I found the manipulated ledgers. When I threatened to expose you, you framed me." The land office had become a courtroom with ranchers and townspeople as jury, all watching the drama unfold with avid interest. "This is preposterous," Prescott scoffed. "The woman is clearly delusional. Sheriff, I believe you have a duty to detain her until proper authorities can be contacted." The territorial sheriff, a weathered man with a star pinned to his sheepskin coat, shifted uncomfortably. "Now hold on, we don't know." "I knew." Silas's quiet voice cut through the commotion. All eyes turned to him. "I beg your pardon?" Prescott demanded. "I said I knew," Silas repeated, gray eyes hard as flint. "Thomas Clayton told me about a woman from Boston who'd run afoul of powerful enemies. Said she was intelligent, principled, and in need of a fresh start." Nora stared at him, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. "You knew," she whispered, "all this time?" "I knew there was something in your past you were running from," Silas clarified. "Not the details, but enough to understand you weren't simply a widow seeking employment." "And you hired her anyway?" the sheriff asked, incredulous. "I judge people by their actions, not rumors or accusations." Silas's gaze remained fixed on Prescott, something dangerous flickering in his expression. "Especially accusations from men who arrive simultaneously with a railroad company suddenly challenging land boundaries through revised surveys." A murmur ran through the crowd as connections began forming in minds throughout the room. "Are you implying some connection between my bank and the railroad company?" Prescott laughed, but it sounded hollow. "That's absurd." "Was it?" Judge Whitaker interjected. Yeah, that's interjected and stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Eastern Capital Holdings owns controlling interest in both Prescott Banking and Western Pacific Railroad. Rather interesting coincidence." "Business associations are hardly criminal," Prescott sniffed, but a bead of sweat had formed on his temple despite the room's chill. "Sheriff," Silas said quietly, I'd like to file a formal complaint against Western Pacific Railroad for falsifying survey documents with intent to defraud landowners. On what evidence? The sheriff demanded. Evidence I'd be happy to provide, Nora stated clearly, including testimony from a former railroad clerk who witnessed the deliberate manipulation of survey maps. Prescott's face drained of color. This is outrageous. Sheriff, this woman is a fugitive from justice. And you, Nora countered, stepping forward despite her fear, are a thief hiding behind respectability. I worked at your father's bank for 3 years. I know exactly how you operate, Frederick. Stealing from those who lack the power to challenge you, destroying anyone who gets in your way. She turned to address the room at large. The same tactics being employed here, against your ranches and farms. A long, tense silence followed her words. Then Judge Whitaker cleared his throat. Sheriff, I believe this situation requires careful investigation of all parties involved. In the meantime, I'm issuing a temporary injunction against any boundary changes based on these so-called revised surveys. He fixed Prescott with a stern look. And while Mrs. Callahan's identity may be in question, formal charges would require extradition proceedings through proper channels, not vigilante detention. This is an outrage, Prescott sputtered. She's admitted to using a false identity. Many folks in Montana Territory have passed they've set aside, the sheriff observed dryly. Don't make them criminals here and now. He turned to Silas. Harrington, you're responsible for her until this matter's sorted. Understood, Silas agreed. This isn't over, Prescott warned, glaring at Nora. Not by a long shot. On that, Nora replied steadily, we agree completely. Outside, the winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered street as Silas and Nora emerged from the land office. Neither spoke as they collected Ethan from the general store and loaded into the wagon for the journey home. The boy, sensing tension, remained uncharacteristically quiet, clutching his new book to his chest. It wasn't until they were well beyond town, alone in the vast white landscape, that Silas finally broke the silence. I think, he said carefully, it's time you told me the whole truth, Nora. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering courage. Yes, she agreed. I believe it is. The journey back to Broken Arrow passed in silence, save for the creaking of the wagon and the soft huffs of the horse's breath clouding in the cold air. Mountains loomed on either side of the valley, their snow-capped peaks burnished gold by the setting sun. Ethan had fallen asleep, his head nodding against Nora's shoulder, exhausted by the day's events and oblivious to the tension radiating between the adults. Nora stared straight ahead, her mind racing. Her carefully constructed life had shattered in an instant, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Yet Silas's unexpected declaration that he had known she was hiding something had thrown her completely off balance. Not just his knowledge, but his apparent acceptance of it. By the time they reached the ranch, twilight had deepened into dusk. The windows of the house glowed with warm lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney into the darkening sky. Lou appeared on the porch as they pulled up, her weathered face a picture of concern. Ethan's sleeping, she observed as Silas lifted the boy from the wagon. I make bed ready. Thank you, Mrs. Lou, Silas said, carrying his son toward the house. He paused at the bottom of the porch steps, glancing back at Nora, who remained seated in the wagon. My office, 10 minutes. It wasn't a request. Nora nodded, watching as he disappeared inside with Ethan. For one wild moment, she considered taking the wagon and fleeing into the night. But where would she go? Winter had descended upon the territory, and she had nowhere else to turn. More importantly, she was tired of running, tired of lies and half-truths. Even if the truth cost her this sanctuary, perhaps it was time to face it. Mrs. Lou reappeared, approaching the wagon. You come inside now. Too cold for sitting. He knows, Mrs. Lou, Nora said softly, about me. The housekeeper's expression didn't change. Mr. Harrington's smart man. See much, say little. She held out a hand to help Nora down. Come, warm self first. Truth keep in warm room better than cold wagon. Inside, the house smelled of pine and the beef stew Mrs. Lou had prepared for dinner. Nora removed her coat and gloves, warming her hands by the kitchen stove. Her stomach churned with anxiety, but she forced herself to remain calm, to order her thoughts. Whatever judgment awaited her in Silas's office, she would face it with dignity. 10 minutes later, she knocked softly on the office door. Enter. Silas stood by the window, silhouetted against the last fading light of day. He had removed his coat but still wore his hat, as if uncertain whether he was truly home. A lamp burned low on his desk, casting long shadows across the room. He didn't turn as she entered, continuing to stare out at the darkened landscape. "Sit down, please," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Nora settled into the chair opposite his desk, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. Silence stretched between them, taut as piano wire. "Your name," he finally said, turning to face her. "Is it truly Nora?" "Yes," she answered. "Nora Bennett. Callahan was my mother's maiden name." He nodded, removing his hat and placing it on the desk before taking his seat. His face, normally so controlled, showed signs of strain. Lines deepened around his eyes, a tightness at the corners of his mouth. "Thomas wrote to me about you," he said, surprising her again. Not by name, but he mentioned corresponding with a woman from Boston who'd found herself in trouble through no fault of her own. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He had a soft heart for lost causes. "We never met," Nora said quietly. "Only exchanged letters. He seemed kind." "He was." Silas studied her face in the lamplight. "Did you steal that money?" "No." The word came firm and clear. "I would never. My father was a minister. He raised me to value truth and honesty above all else." "Then tell me the truth now," Silas said, leaning forward slightly. "All of it." Nora took a deep breath, then began her story. She told him about her position at Prescott Banking and Trust, how she had worked her way up from clerk to bookkeeper through diligence and attention to detail, how she had begun noticing small discrepancies in certain accounts, primarily those belonging to immigrant laborers and factory workers. "At first, I thought they were simple errors," she explained, "but the pattern was too consistent. Money disappeared from dozens of accounts in small increments, then reappeared in the investment portfolios of wealthy clients, including Frederick Prescott Sr. and his son. She described gathering evidence, documenting the transfers, finally confronting the Prescotts with her findings. Frederick Jr. laughed in my face," Nora said, the memory still raw. "Said no one would believe a spinster with no connections over the Prescott family name. Then he showed me ledgers with my signature on withdrawal slips I'd never signed, careful forgeries authorizing the very transfers I was questioning. They framed you," Silas said. "Not a question, but a statement." "Perfectly," Nora agreed bitterly. "They even arranged for me to receive an unusually large payment the day before the discrepancies were discovered. Made it look like I'd been skimming for months." She told him about fleeing Boston, about her correspondence with Thomas Clayton, her desperate hope for a new beginning in Montana territory. "When I arrived and found Thomas dead, I thought all hope was lost," she admitted. "Then you offered me a position, and I saw a chance to rebuild." Using a false identity, Nora's gaze dropped to her hands. "Yes, it was wrong to deceive you and Ethan. I'm sorry for that." Silence descended again as Silas absorbed her story. Outside, snow had begun falling once more, soft flakes drifting past the window. "I believe you," he said finally. Nora's head jerked up, eyes wide with surprise. "You do?" "Frederick Prescott strikes me as exactly the sort of man who would sacrifice others to protect himself," Silas said, a strange edge to his voice. "I've known men like him before." "But why would you believe me over him? I'm a stranger, a fugitive by my own admission." Silas rose, moving to the bookshelf where he retrieved a small wooden box. He set it on the desk between them, then carefully opened it to reveal a tarnished silver badge. "I wasn't always a rancher," he said quietly, pushing the box toward her. "Before Montana, before Broken Arrow, I was Circuit Judge Silas Harrington of the Illinois Northern District." Nora stared at the badge, understanding dawning slowly. "You were a judge?" 8 years on the bench in Chicago," he confirmed. "Until I ruled against a powerful railroad in a case involving worker deaths from negligence. The owners had friends in high places, including my superior judges." His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "Suddenly, evidence appeared suggesting I'd accepted bribes in previous cases. None of it true. All of it convincing." "They framed you too," Nora whispered. Just like your Prescott's, Silas agreed. Only difference was, I saw it coming in time to resign before charges were filed. Rebecca and I came west, changed our name slightly from Harrigan to Harrington, and started over. Ethan mentioned his mother said you came west because bad people hurt you. Rebecca was kind in her explanations, Silas said, a softness entering his expression at the mention of his wife. The truth was uglier. I stood against corruption and lost everything I'd worked for. He closed the box, returning it to the shelf. So you see, Mrs. Bennett, I understand something of your situation. And I recognize the look of an honest person wrongfully accused. Relief washed over Nora, so powerful she felt lightheaded. Thank you, she managed, for believing me. Don't thank me yet, Silas cautioned, returning to his chair. Your presence here complicates an already difficult situation. Prescott clearly intends to use the embezzlement charge against you, either to force your testimony supporting the railroad's claims or to discredit you if you speak against them. I won't support their lies, Nora said firmly, no matter the consequence to myself. It may not be just yourself at risk, Silas pointed out. If Prescott realizes your connection to Zhang and the other railroad workers, they could face reprisals. Nora's breath caught. How did you... I've known about Mrs. Liu's nighttime activities for months, Silas said, a hint of amusement breaking through his serious expression. This is my ranch. Very little happens here that I don't eventually notice. You never said anything. It wasn't my place to interfere with her compassion, particularly when I agreed with it. He leaned back in his chair. The railroad's treatment of Chinese workers is abhorrent. I've sent supplies when I could, quietly. Nora shook her head in wonder. You're full of surprises, Mr. Harrington. As are you, Mrs. Bennett. His expression sobered. But we face a serious problem. Prescott will likely return with formal charges, possibly a federal marshal. The railroad will proceed with their boundary challenges, and we still don't know if there's a connection between all this and Rebecca's death. Nora froze. You believe your wife was murdered? I believe her symptoms were inconsistent with pneumonia, Silas said carefully, and I find it suspicious that she fell ill immediately after visiting town, where she'd gone to research land records regarding the railroad's planned expansion. Zhang mentioned the railroad created false survey maps, Nora offered, moving boundaries to claim more land. Could Rebecca have discovered this? It's possible. Silas rubbed his temples, fatigue evident in the gesture. Rebecca was intelligent, observant. If she noticed discrepancies in the surveys, they might have silenced her. Nora finished the terrible thought. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow against the windows in soft patters. The lamp flickered, sending shadows dancing across the walls. We need evidence, Silas said finally. Something concrete linking the railroad to both the boundary falsifications and possibly to Rebecca's death. Without it, we're just throwing accusations against a powerful company with friends in territorial government. Zhang might know more, Nora suggested, and Ethan mentioned his mother gave him something to hide. A map, he said. Silas straightened. He never told me this. Children keep secrets when they're frightened, Nora said gently, especially if they were specifically instructed to. I need to speak with him. Silas rose, determination replacing weariness. First thing tomorrow. And what about me? Nora asked quietly. Should I leave Broken Arrow? My presence puts you and Ethan at risk. Silas regarded her for a long moment. Where would you go? I don't know, she admitted. But I won't bring danger to your doorstep after all you've done for me. Nora, he said, using her first name deliberately, you've brought more than danger. You've brought life back to this house, to Ethan, to Mia. He seemed surprised by his own words, but continued, we'll face this together. I'm not sending you away to face Prescott alone. Something warm unfurled in Nora's chest. Gratitude, relief, and another emotion she wasn't ready to name. Thank you, she said simply. Get some rest, Silas advised, moving toward the door. Tomorrow will bring challenges enough. As Nora passed him in the doorway, their eyes met briefly. In his gray gaze, she saw not just determination, but something that mirrored her own unspoken feelings. A connection forged through shared injustice and mutual understanding. That night, Nora knelt beside her bed in prayer, for the first time since arriving at Broken Arrow. "Lord," she whispered, "thank you for guiding me to this place, to these people. Whatever trials await us, grant me the strength to face them with truth and courage." Outside, the storm howled across the Montana Valley, but within the walls of Broken Arrow Ranch, Nora Bennett finally slept without fear. Dawn broke clear and cold over a landscape transformed by the night's snowfall. Drifts piled against the barn and outbuildings, pristine white broken only by the tracks of early rising ranch hands making their way to morning chores. From her window, Nora watched the sun touch the mountains, turning snow-laden pines to crystalline sculptures. Today, they would search for answers about the railroad schemes, about Rebecca's death, about the map Ethan had mentioned. Despite the danger ahead, Nora felt lighter than she had in months. The truth of her identity was known, at least to Silas, and he had not turned away from her. When she entered the kitchen, she found Ethan already at the table, solemnly eating porridge while Mrs. Lou bustled around the stove. Silas was nowhere to be seen. "Good morning," Nora said, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Lou with a grateful smile. Ethan looked up, his young face serious. "Pa told me," he said without preamble, "about you not being a real widow, about the bad men who tried to blame you for something you didn't do." Nora set her cup down carefully. "I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you, Ethan." The boy shrugged. "Pa said sometimes people have to hide to stay safe. Like the Chinese workers, Mrs. Lou helps." His matter-of-fact acceptance stunned her. "Pa also said you need to see what Ma gave me before she died." "If you're willing to show us," Nora said gently. Ethan nodded, pushing away his half-eaten breakfast. "It's not here, it's by Ma's grave. She said to put it somewhere no one would think to look." A soft footfall announced Silas's arrival. He stood in the doorway, dressed for outdoor work, his expression a mixture of determination and something like grief. "You ready, son?" "Yes, sir." Ethan rose, suddenly seeming older than his 9 years. "We have to go to Ma's grave." "I know." Silas's voice was gentle. Mrs. Lou's prepared a sled. The snow's too deep for walking comfortably. Within minutes, they were trudging through the snow, Silas pulling a small wooden sled with Ethan aboard, Nora following in their tracks. The family graveyard lay on a small rise behind the house, enclosed by a wrought iron fence partially buried in drifts. 3 markers stood within. 2 older ones bearing names Nora didn't recognize, and a newer stone inscribed simply, "Rebecca Harrington, beloved wife and mother, 1844 to 1884. Ethan slid from the sled as they reached the gate, his small face solemn. "She told me to put it in the hollow oak, said only to show Pa if something happened to her." He led them to a massive oak tree that stood sentinel over the small cemetery. Snow had collected in the crooks of its bare branches, and its trunk was wide enough that Nora couldn't have circled it with her arms. At its base, half concealed by snow, a large opening gaped in the trunk, not rotted, but as if the tree had grown around in absence. Ethan knelt, brushing away snow and reaching deep into the hollow. His tongue caught between his teeth in concentration as he stretched, finally withdrawing a small oilskin packet bound with twine. "She made me promise," he said, looking up at his father with anxious eyes. "Made me swear not to tell unless that she got real sick and didn't get better." Silas knelt in the snow beside his son, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did exactly right, Ethan. Your mother would be proud of how you kept your promise." "She said bad men might come looking for this," Ethan continued, clutching the packet to his chest. "Said it showed they were liars." "May I see it, son?" Silas asked, his voice carefully controlled. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan handed over the packet. With cold, stiffened fingers, Silas unwrapped the oilskin, revealing a folded document protected from the elements by its waterproof covering. As he carefully unfolded the brittle paper, Nora moved closer, looking over his shoulder. It was a survey map, yellowed with age but clearly official, bearing territorial seals and surveyor's notations. Red Creek wandered across the page in blue ink, its course marking the southern boundary of what was labeled Harrigan Claim, Broken Arrow's original name. "This is the original survey from 18 Silas murmured, his breath clouding in the cold air. "The one filed with the Territorial Land Office when I first claimed this land." "Look," Nora pointed to notations along the creek. The township markers, the section corners, they're all based on the Tulum baseline established in 18. The what? Ethan asked, peering at the map. It's how surveyors measure land, Nora explained. They establish a baseline, a starting point, and measure everything else from there. She traced the creek's path with her finger. In 1882, they discovered the original compass readings were off and established a new baseline. But that can't retroactively change property lines already legally established. That's what they're doing, Silas said, understanding dawning in his eyes. They're applying the 1882 standards to 1877 claims, shifting everything just enough to claim portions of creek-adjacent properties. Exactly, Nora nodded. And with water rights being so valuable for the railroad, they steal land without paying, Silas finished grimly. He turned to Ethan. Did your mother say where she got this map? The boy frowned in concentration. From a man in town. Said he worked for the railroad but didn't like what they were doing. Gave it to her after she asked questions at the land office. Zhang, Nora breathed. It must have been him, before he was demoted to manual labor. We need to speak with him immediately, Silas decided, carefully refolding the map and securing it inside his coat. This is evidence of deliberate fraud, but we need testimony to support it. They returned to the house quickly, the gravity of their discovery lending speed to their steps. Boom. Lou was waiting in the kitchen, her sharp eyes taking in their serious expressions. You find something, she stated rather than asked. We need to speak with Zhang, Nora told her brother. It's urgent. Mrs. Lou nodded once. I take you, but first, eat. She pointed firmly to bowls of stew she'd prepared. Need strength for what comes. Despite their impatience, they recognized the wisdom in her words. While they ate, Silas outlined a plan. They would speak with Zhang, document his testimony, then ride to Helena to present their evidence to the territorial governor, bypassing local officials who might be influenced by railroad money. What about Prescott? Nora asked. The thought of confronting her former employer sending a chill through her that had nothing to do with the weather. Without local law enforcement willing to arrest you, he'll have to apply for formal extradition, Silas explained. That takes time, and once we expose the railroad's fraud, his credibility will be severely damaged. And if he brings a federal marshal? The possibility had haunted her thoughts since their confrontation in town. Silas's expression hardened. Then I'll use every legal means at my disposal to protect you. I still have colleagues in the federal judiciary who owe me favors. His certainty comforted her, though she knew the road ahead remained treacherous. After eating, they bundled in their warmest clothing and followed Mrs. Liu along the now familiar path to the cave where Zhang and the other workers had taken refuge. The day had warmed slightly, the sun strong enough to create a glittering crust on the snow, but the air still bit with winter's teeth. Zhang was sitting near the cave entrance when they arrived, his injured legs stretched before him, significantly improved since Nora had first seen him. He tensed at the sight of Silas, clearly uncertain of this unexpected visitor. It's all right, Nora assured him quickly. Mr. Harrington knows about you. He wants to help. Mrs. Liu spoke rapidly in Cantonese, explaining the situation. Zhang relaxed marginally, though wariness remained in his eyes as he regarded Silas. You ranch owner, he said in careful English. Why help Chinese workers? Because what the railroad is doing is wrong, Silas replied simply. To you, to other landowners, to all of us. He withdrew Rebecca's map from his coat. Did you give this to my wife last spring? Zhang's eyes widened at the sight of the document. He nodded slowly. Yes, she asked many questions about railroad plans. I show her true maps, not false ones railroad make after. Can you explain what they did? Nora encouraged. How they changed the surveys? With growing confidence, Zhang described how the railroad's chief surveyor had ordered new maps drawn using the 1882 baseline, deliberately creating discrepancies with original property grants. The goal was to claim portions of creek-adjacent lands without fair compensation, particularly targeting smaller ranches that couldn't afford lengthy legal battles. They tell us draw creek different, Zhang demonstrated with his hands. Move line here, make boundary there. When I say wrong, they say I work dynamite instead. And my wife discovered this? Silas asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Zhang nodded solemnly. She very smart lady. See old maps, new maps, ask right questions. I afraid for her, Give her original map for protection. His expression darkened. 2 days later, men come looking for me. Say I steal company property. I run, hide. Then here she dies suddenly. A heavy silence followed his words. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Rebecca's discovery and her subsequent death were connected. Would you be willing to testify to this? Silas asked finally. Before the territorial governor or a federal judge if necessary? Fear flickered across Zhang's face, but determination quickly replaced it. Yes, for Mrs. Harrington, she only one who listened when I say railroad doing bad things. It could be dangerous, Nora cautioned. Already dangerous, Zhang replied with simple dignity. Better dangerous with truth than safe with lies. As they prepared to leave, Zhang called Nora back. From beneath his bedroll, he withdrew a small packet similar to the one that had contained Rebecca's map. Mrs. Harrington, leave this with me, he explained. Say give to husband if anything happened to her. I afraid before, not know if trust him. Silas accepted the packet with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, Rebecca's flowing script immediately recognizable to him. As he read, his face paled, jaw tightening against emotion. She knew, he said finally, voice rough. She suspected the railroad of tampering with water sources when other ranchers who opposed them fell ill. She was investigating, gathering evidence. He looked up, grief and rage warring in his expression. The night before she fell ill, she caught someone near our well, thought it was a trespasser at the time. They poisoned your water, Nora whispered, horror flooding through her. That's why her symptoms didn't match pneumonia. Arsenic, Silas confirmed grimly, causes fluid in the lungs that resembles pneumonia. The doctor wasn't familiar with the symptoms, made the obvious diagnosis. Ethan, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke. They killed Ma? The railroad men? The naked pain in the boy's voice broke something in Nora's heart. She knelt beside him, taking his cold hands in hers. It appears so, she said gently, not shielding him from the terrible truth but offering her presence as comfort. Your mother was very brave. She was trying to protect your home, your father, you. Then we have to stop them, Ethan said, a fierce determination replacing grief in his young face. Make them pay for what they did. Silas placed a hand on his son's shoulder. We will, Ethan, with truth and law, not vengeance. He looked at Zhang. We leave for Helena tomorrow at first light. Can you travel? Zhang nodded. For justice, I can travel. As they made their way back to the ranch house, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of more snow. Nora walked beside Silas, their shoulders occasionally brushing, united in purpose, if not yet in spoken feeling. Will it be enough? She asked quietly. The map, Zhang's testimony, Rebecca's letter. It has to be, Silas replied, his gaze fixed on the mountains ahead. For Rebecca, for all of us. That night, as Nora helped Mrs. Liu prepare provisions for their journey, Silas worked in his office, drafting formal complaints against the railroad company and preparing the evidence they had gathered. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, solemnly copying the Lord's Prayer into his journal, a task Nora had suggested might bring him comfort. The household felt poised on a knife's edge, suspended between truth and justice, danger and deliverance. Tomorrow they would ride for Helena, confronting powerful enemies with nothing but evidence and determination. The outcome remained uncertain, the risks substantial. Yet despite these shadows, Nora felt a curious peace. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she was moving towards something rather than away from it, toward justice, toward truth, perhaps even toward home. Dawn had not yet broken when they set out for Helena. The eastern sky showed only the faintest lightning, stars still bright overhead, as Silas helped Nora and Ethan into the enclosed wagon. Miss Liu had packed blankets, food, and extra clothing for the 2-day journey, tucking hot bricks wrapped in flannel beneath their feet for warmth. Zhang sat huddled in the wagon bed, bundled against the cold, the precious map and documents secured inside his coat. 2 ranch hands accompanied them on horseback. Jonas and Will, trusted men Silas had selected for both their loyalty and their skill with firearms. Railroad men might try to stop us, Silas had explained the night before. I'm not taking chances with our safety. As the wagon pulled away from Broken Arrow, Nora glanced back at the ranch house, warm light glowing from its windows, smoke rising straight from the chimney in the still morning air. In just a month, it had become more home to her than any place since her parents' death. The thought of not returning squeezed her heart with unexpected pain. "We'll be back," Silas said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "All of us." The journey to Helena was arduous. Snow made the roads treacherous, forcing them to travel at a crawling pace. They stopped only briefly to rest the horses and warm themselves with coffee from a thermos Mrs. Lou had prepared. By nightfall, they had covered barely half the distance to the territorial capital. "We'll make camp here," Silas decided as they reached a sheltered hollow beside the road. "Continue at first light tomorrow." The men quickly established a camp, building a fire and erecting a canvas shelter to block the wind. Ethan, despite his determination to be brave, was exhausted, falling asleep almost immediately after eating a simple meal of bread and dried venison. Nora tucked blankets around him in the wagon bed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead with a gentle touch. "He's a remarkable boy," she said to Silas as they sat beside the fire, the ranch hands taking first watch at the perimeter of their camp. "So resilient." "Like his mother," Silas agreed, his gaze fixed on the flames. Rebecca had that same spirit, faced whatever came without flinching. He glanced at Nora. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in appearance, but in strength." "I'm honored by the comparison," Nora said softly. "She must have been an extraordinary woman." "She was." Silas poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "When I lost my judgeship, lost everything I'd worked for, she never wavered, just said, 'Then we'll build something new.' Came west with me, helped establish Broken Arrow from nothing but wilderness." Nora hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered in her mind. "Do you think she would approve of me teaching Ethan, helping with the ranch, everything else?" Silas looked at her fully then, firelight casting half his face in shadow, half in golden light. "Rebecca's last words to me were to take care of Ethan and to remember that life continues even after great loss." His voice softened. "Yes, Nora. I believe she would approve of you, your courage, your integrity, your kindness to our son." The words "our son" lingered between them, weighted with meaning. Nora's heart beat faster at what remained unspoken. "I've grown to care for him," she admitted. "For both of you." Silas reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers. "And we for you." The simple touch, the quiet words carried more significance than grand declarations. In that moment, beside a campfire in the Montana wilderness, with danger still ahead and the past still unresolved, something new began to take root, fragile as spring's first bloom, but just as determined to grow. The moment was broken by Jonas returning from his patrol around the camp. "Riders approaching from the east," he reported quietly. "Two men, moving slow like they're trying not to be heard." Silas was instantly alert, rising to his feet. "Get Ethan and Zhang deeper into the trees," he instructed. "Nora, stay with them." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," she protested. "Please," his eyes held hers. "I need to know you're safe." Reluctantly, she nodded, moving quickly to wake Ethan and help Zhang limp into the shelter of the pine trees beyond their camp. Jonas accompanied them, rifle ready, while Silas and Will remained by the fire, weapons concealed but accessible. From their hiding place among the trees, Nora could see the camp, but remained hidden from view. She held Ethan close, one hand over his mouth to ensure his silence. Zhang crouched beside them, his face tense in the dim light filtering through the branches. Two riders emerged from the darkness, approaching the camp with exaggerated casualness. Even at a distance, Nora recognized Frederick Prescott Jr., his expensive coat unmistakable despite the trail dust covering it. The second man was unfamiliar, heavier built, with the hard eyes of someone accustomed to violence. "Evening, gentlemen," Prescott called, his cultured Boston accent incongruous in the wilderness setting. Quite a coincidence meeting fellow travelers on such a remote road. "No coincidence at all, I expect," Silas replied calmly, standing with deceptive relaxation beside the fire. "What do you want, Prescott?" "Merely to ensure justice is served." Prescott dismounted, his companion remaining vigilantly on horseback. "I understand you're harboring a fugitive from justice, Miss Bennett, as well as a thief who stole railroad company property." "I'm harboring no one," Silas countered. "Mrs. Bennett is employed at my ranch legally, and the only thief I'm aware of is the Western Pacific Railroad, attempting to steal land through fraudulent surveys. Prescott's smile didn't reach his eyes. Strong accusations. I'd be careful about making them publicly without substantial proof. Oh, we have proof, Silas assured him. Original surveys, witness testimony, documentation of deliberate fraud. Enough to interest the territorial governor, I believe. A flicker of unease crossed Prescott's face before his confident mask returned. That would be quite compelling if you had such evidence. But accidents happen on these mountain roads, especially in winter. Wagons overturn, documents get lost, witnesses disappear. The threat hung in the air, clear as the star-filled sky above. Is that what happened to my wife? Silas asked, his voice deceptively soft. An accident? Prescott's expression faltered. I don't know what you mean. I never met your wife. But your associates did. Silas took a step forward, after she discovered the same survey fraud we're bringing to light. Strange how she fell ill so suddenly after confronting the railroad about their methods. Now you're being ridiculous, Prescott scoffed, but sweat gleamed on his forehead despite the cold. The railroad had nothing to do with any illness. I didn't mention how she died, Silas interrupted. Just that she fell ill. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling fire and the soft huff of horse's breath in the cold air. This conversation is pointless, Prescott finally said, a new edge in his voice. We know you have the survey map and the Chinese clerk. Hand them over, along with Miss Bennett, and you can return to your ranch unharmed. The railroad might even reconsider its boundary claims as a gesture of goodwill. And if I refuse? Prescott's companion shifted in his saddle, his coat falling open to reveal a holstered pistol. Then, as I said, accidents happen. From their hiding place, Nora could see Will slowly positioning himself for a better angle, his hand near his own weapon. Jonas tensed beside her, clearly calculating whether he could reach the armed man before he drew. Violence hung in the balance, waiting for a single wrong word or movement to erupt. The sharp crack of a breaking branch made everyone freeze. All eyes turned toward the trees where Nora, Ethan, and Jane concealed themselves. Ethan had shifted position, accidentally stepping on a fallen limb. Seems your no one is hiding in the woods, Prescott said with malicious satisfaction. Phillips, check those trees. The armed man nudged his horse forward, hand moving to his pistol. In that moment, Nora made a decision. Rising from their hiding place, she stepped into the clearing, hands visible at her sides. I'm here, Frederick, she called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. No need to threaten anyone else. Nora, no! Silas moved toward her, but Will held him back with a warning hand. Prescott's smile widened. Miss Bennett, how convenient. Now where is the Chinese thief in the stolen map? There is no stolen map, Nora replied, moving slowly toward the fire. Only an original territorial survey that proves the railroad has been falsifying documents to steal land. A touching story, Prescott sneered, but hardly credible coming from an embezzler. I never stole a penny, Nora stated firmly. But you did, Frederick. You and your father systematically drained the accounts of immigrants and factory workers, then framed me when I discovered it. Phillips, secure Miss Bennett, Prescott ordered, ignoring her accusations. We're taking her back to Boston to face charges. The armed man dismounted, moving toward Nora with purpose. Silas stepped between them, shoulders squared. You're not taking her anywhere, he said, voice low with warning. Stand aside, rancher, Phillips growled, hand on his pistol. This doesn't concern you. Everything about this concerns me, Silas replied. The woman you're threatening, the land you're trying to steal, the wife you may have murdered. Phillips drew his weapon. Last warning. Stand aside or... The blast of a rifle shot split the night. Phillips cried out, his pistol flying from his hand as blood bloomed on his sleeve. From the edge of the clearing, Jonas stood with his rifle raised, smoke still curling from the barrel. Next one won't just graze your arm, he called calmly. Back away from them. Chaos erupted. Prescott lunged for Phillips' fallen pistol, but Silas was faster, delivering a swift kick that sent the weapon spinning into the darkness. Will appeared behind Prescott, pressing his own gun against the banker's back. Don't move, Will advised. I've got 7 brothers and sisters who lost their family farm to your railroad friends. Wouldn't take much excuse to pull this trigger. In moments, the situation had reversed entirely. Philip sat clutching his bleeding arm while Jonas tied Prescott's hands behind his back with leather straps. You've assaulted representatives of Prescott Banking and the Western Pacific Railroad, Prescott blustered, though fear had replaced arrogance in his eyes. The legal consequences will be severe. Not as severe as those for attempted murder, corporate fraud, and possibly actual murder, Silas countered. He turned to Will. Secure them for the night. We'll take them with us to Helena. The territorial governor can decide what to do with them after hearing our evidence. As the ranch hands led the prisoners away, Ethan emerged from the trees, running to throw his arms around Nora's waist. I thought they were going to take you away, he said, his voice muffled against her coat. No one's taking anyone away, she assured him, smoothing his hair. We're all going to Helena together to make sure justice is done. Silas approached them, his eyes finding Nora's in the firelight. That was either very brave or very foolish, he said quietly. Perhaps a bit of both, she admitted with a small smile. But I couldn't hide while you faced danger on my behalf. His expression softened. Thank you, he said simply, and in those two words she heard everything he couldn't yet express. Zhang limped from the trees to join them, clutching the precious documents to his chest. They not get map, he said with a quiet pride. We still go Helena? At first light, Silas confirmed, with 2 additional passengers who can corroborate our claims about railroad tactics. The remainder of the night passed without further incident, though sleep came fitfully for all. By dawn, they were back on the road, Prescott and Phillips bound and under guard in the wagon bed, while Zhang rode beside Ethan and Nora in the relative comfort of the passenger seat. Helena appeared on the horizon by mid-afternoon the following day, a proper city with brick buildings, church spires, and the imposing structure of the territorial capital standing proud on its hill. After the isolation of Broken Arrow and the small frontier town of Silver Creek, the bustle of the territorial capital seemed almost overwhelming. They made their way directly to the governor's mansion, an elegant building surrounded by bare winter gardens. Their unusual party, 2 prisoners, armed guards, and determined faces covered in trail dust, caused quite a stir among the staff. But Silas's former position as a judge and his confidence in presenting their case secured them an audience with Governor Samuel T. Hauser. In the governor's wood-paneled study, their story unfolded piece by piece. The falsified surveys, Zhang's testimony about railroad practices, Rebecca's discoveries and suspicious death, the attempted intimidation on the trail to Helena, and finally Nora's account of similar financial misdeeds at Prescott Banking in Boston. Governor Hauser, a shrewd-eyed man with a luxuriant mustache, listened without interruption, occasionally making notes or examining the documents they presented. When they finished, he sat back in his leather chair, regarding them thoughtfully. These are serious allegations against powerful interests, he observed. The railroad has many friends in territorial government, and many enemies among the people those officials supposedly represent, Silas countered. Ranchers, farmers, merchants, all suffering from the railroad's predatory practices. What exactly are you asking of me? Hauser inquired. Justice, Silas replied simply. A formal investigation into the railroad's survey practices, protection for those who have testified, and a fair hearing for Mrs. Bennett regarding the false charges against her. Hauser's gaze shifted to Nora. The embezzlement accusation is a matter for Massachusetts courts, not territorial jurisdiction. I understand, Nora said, but the pattern of fraud is the same. Powerful interests manipulating records to victimize those with less influence. Mr. Prescott's presence here, working with the railroad, suggests a connection worth investigating. The governor considered this, then nodded slowly. I'll telegraph the Massachusetts authorities regarding possible corporate connections between Prescott Banking and Western Pacific Railroad. In the meantime, he reached for a bell on his desk, summoning his secretary. I'll have formal orders drawn up suspending all boundary disputes based on the revised surveys pending full investigation. Relief washed over Nora like a physical wave. Beside her, Silas straightened, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Thank you, Governor, he said with quiet dignity. Don't thank me yet, Hauser cautioned. The railroad will fight this at every turn. And you, he looked at Nora, still face serious charges in Boston. The most I can do is refuse immediate extradition pending further investigation. That's all we ask, Silas assured him. A fair investigation, following evidence wherever it leads. As they left the governor's mansion, the winter sun was already sinking toward the western mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and rose. Prescott and Phillips had been taken into territorial custody, their protests falling on deaf ears once the governor had reviewed the evidence. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his young face weary but determined as they made their way to a hotel where they would spend the night before beginning the journey home. "Now we wait," Silas told him, a hand on his shoulder, "for justice to work its slow but certain way." "Will bad men come after us again?" the boy persisted. "They might try," Silas admitted honestly, "but we've made powerful friends too, and the truth is on our side." That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep in the hotel room he shared with his father, Nora stood at the window of her own small room, watching snow begin to fall once more over Helena's streets. A soft knock at her door roused her from contemplation. Silas stood in the hallway, his tall frame seeming almost too large for the narrow space. "May I come in?" he asked. "Just to talk." Nora nodded, stepping back to admit him. Propriety demanded she leave the door open, but privacy won out as she closed it softly behind him. "Governor Hauser sent a message," Silas began without preamble. "He's received preliminary response from Boston authorities. It seems Prescott Banking has been under investigation for some time. Complaints similar to yours from other employees, customers reporting discrepancies." Hope flickered to life in Nora's chest. "They believe me?" "They're reopening your case," Silas confirmed. "With Prescott Jr.'s arrest here and evidence of his connection to railroad fraud, they're taking a closer look at the embezzlement charges." "I might be cleared," Nora whispered, scarcely daring to believe it. "You might," Silas agreed. He hesitated, then added, "which means you would be free to return to Boston, resume your life there." The thought should have brought joy, but instead Nora felt a curious emptiness at the prospect. Boston belonged to her past, her parents, her former life, her innocence before Prescott's betrayal. It wasn't home anymore. "I don't want to return to Boston," she said quietly. "No, Otto?" Something like hope kindled in Silas's gray eyes. "No." Nora moved closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his beard, the lines at the corners of his eyes. "My place is at Broken Arrow now, with Ethan. With you." Silas reached for her hands, engulfing them in his larger ones. "Are you certain? It won't be easy. The railroad investigation, possible trial for Rebecca's death if we can prove it was murder, rebuilding the ranch after all this." "I'm certain," Nora assured him, her heart full and steady. "I've run away from trouble before. I'm ready to stand and face it now, beside you, if you'll have me." "If I'll have you," Silas repeated, a rare smile transforming his usually solemn features. "Nora Bennett, I have been alone in a crowded room since Rebecca died. Then you arrived, and suddenly there was light again. In my home, in my son's eyes, in places inside me I thought had gone dark forever." He drew her gently closer, one hand rising to touch her cheek with a tenderness that belied his strength. "I will have you gladly," he continued, voice rough with emotion, "as teacher to my son, as partner in my home, as companion in whatever battles lie ahead. If you'll have me in return, a broken judge trying to rebuild something worthy on the frontier." "I will," Nora whispered, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "With all my heart." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a passion, sweet with the knowledge of shared purpose and mutual respect. When they parted, Nora felt as though something long fractured within her had finally begun to heal. Spring came late to Montana that year, snow lingering in shadowed hollows well into April. But when it arrived, it came with a vengeance. Wildflowers erupting across meadows, creeks swollen with snowmelt, birdsong filling the air from dawn to dusk. At Broken Arrow Ranch, other changes blossomed alongside the season. The territorial investigation had cleared Silas of all boundary disputes, confirming his original land grant in full. The railroad company, facing multiple fraud charges and growing public outrage, had withdrawn their claims against all affected ranchers. Zhang had testified before a territorial grand jury, leading to indictments against several railroad officials. He now worked officially at Broken Arrow, his knowledge of irrigation helping expand the ranch's productive land. Mrs. Liu had established a small school for the children of Chinese workers who had begun settling in Silver Creek, no longer forced to hide their presence. In Boston, the investigation into Prescott banking had vindicated Nora completely. Frederick Prescott Sr. had fled to Europe, while his son awaited trial for multiple charges of fraud, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy in the death of Rebecca Harrington. The evidence wasn't conclusive enough to prove murder, but it was sufficient to ensure he would never again walk free. On a perfect day in late May, with the mountains still snow-capped but the valley lush with new green, Nora Bennett became Nora Harrington in a simple ceremony at Silver Creek's small church. Ethan stood proudly beside his father, serving as best man despite being barely tall enough to see over the pulpit. Mrs. Liu wept openly, a rare display of emotion from the usually stoic woman. Judge Whitaker, who had performed the ceremony, raised a toast at the reception held at Broken Arrow afterward. To truth, which though often buried, always finds its way to light, and to new beginnings built on foundations of honesty and courage. As twilight descended, Nora and Silas stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, watching as lanterns were lit for dancing in the ranch yard. Ethan raced among the guests, excitement overcoming his usual reserve. "Happy?" Silas asked, his arm around his new wife's waist. "Completely," Nora assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't quite believe it's real. A year ago I was running for my life, carrying nothing but guilt and fear. Now you have a home," Silas finished. "A family, a future." "We all do," she agreed, watching Ethan's joyful face as he attempted to teach Mrs. Liu a Virginia reel. Built on truth, not lies. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, eternal and unchanging. But on the Montana earth below, lives once broken had been remade, stronger at the mended places. A woman who had fled in desperation had found her stand in courage. A man grieving alone had opened his heart to new love. A boy who had lost his mother had found healing in honesty and shared memories. And Broken Arrow Ranch, true to its name, had proven that what is broken can indeed be reforged, different perhaps, but whole once more, and ready to fly true toward whatever future awaited.